All right, I think we are live. Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Jeremy Butler. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America. Appreciate, again, you joining us. If you weren't tracking, so we normally have a IAVA Annual Heroes Gala every year in November. It usually follows a few days before or after Veterans Day. As you can guess, the pandemic threw a big wrench in many of our plans this year. We normally would have gathered with thousands of veterans and supporters and friends in New York City on Veterans Day to march in the Veterans Day Parade. We had to cancel that, and instead we did a virtual online type of parade. It also meant canceling the annual Heroes Gala, unfortunately, where we usually gather here in New York City to celebrate the community. And the most important thing that we do at the gala is we highlight a veteran and a civilian honoree, two people who have really gone above and beyond to support our community, to represent our community, and to just do incredible things for and on behalf of our community. So if you missed it, on Tuesday, we talked to retired Air Force Colonel Nicole Malachowski, an incredible veteran, former fighter pilot, and now advocate on behalf of wounded veterans and those struggling from complex medical diseases. Today, I'm very excited to be speaking to Maureen Mo Cedor. She is the legal director at Swords to Plowshares. I'm going to very quickly run through a bit of her bio just so you know who we're talking to, but then I'm excited to speak to her about much more of the details of everything that I'm going to go over here. But Mo is the legal director at Swords to Plowshares. That's an organization in the Bay Area that supports homeless, low-income, and at-risk veterans. She leads a team of attorneys there. Before that, she was a staff attorney at Public Counsel, which is a law organization, another nonprofit that works for children, youth, persecuted immigrants, military veterans, and many others to get them the law representation, the legal representation that they deserve. Before that, she was a staff attorney at Inner City Law Center, where they worked on behalf of tenants, working poor families, immigrants, people who are homeless or disabled, to include veterans. And that was in downtown Los Angeles, right there, real on Skid Row, really, where there's so many people in need of support. She was also a staff attorney at DNA People's Legal Services, another nonprofit that works to protect civil rights, promote tribal sovereignty, and alleviate civil legal problems for people who live in poverty in the southwestern United States. She is a graduate of Boston College, where she got her law degree. While there, she interned at the Massachusetts Transgender Legal Advocates. She was a racial justice policy intern for the ACLU of Northern California. She was a student attorney for Boston College Juvenile Rights Advocacy Project. And prior to all that, she was right here in New York City, getting her degree, a BA in political science and human rights at Barnard College. Mo, thank you very much for joining us. Another thing to add to your already impressive resume is I'm excited to have you here as our 2020 Civilian Leadership Honoree. I think the listeners, it's obvious why we wanted to honor you in that way, but I am really excited to talk to you in more detail about your personal history and about the work that you're doing and why it's so important, because I feel like you are working in a space that is often overlooked by the veteran community and maybe misunderstood incredibly by the veteran community. So first and foremost, thank you for joining us. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jeremy. This is such a thrill and such an honor. And I really appreciate the opportunity to talk with you and to highlight the work that we're doing at Swords. And more importantly, to talk about the veterans that we serve and all the things we need to keep doing to help them.
Excellent. Well, normally we'd be on a stage, we'd be all dressed up and things like that, and I'd be handing you a nice award. Unfortunately, we just had to put it in a box and mail it to you this year. I'm sorry, it's not quite as exciting, but I'm glad you have it and have it proudly displayed at your home office. So congratulations again. And I'd love to, we got a lot to cover. We're technically scheduled for an hour, so I'd love to talk to you for as long as you have available, because there is so much to cover. But really, I kind of want to start from the beginning for you. Like, what led you down this path? It seems like you, looking at your biography, you really knew what you wanted to do, and you have really dedicated your entire professional career and even educational career. While you were in school, it seemed like you were focused on these underserved communities. What led to that? How did you get into it? Is there military somewhere in your family background that drove you to this? Really curious to know what got you here.
Yeah. That's an interesting question. I don't know, maybe I have a kind of an odd path that I've taken to get to where I am, but if I had to be totally honest, I would say the biggest sort of pivotal moment for me in my life that led me down this path of doing anti-poverty work and public interest work was 9/11. I was in high school at the time. I was a senior in high school. I was at a boarding school, all girls, very privileged environment, very insular environment. And, there was all this sort of high school drama and all the stuff that, you're very like in your own world and concerned about yourself. And that day really pulled me out of that bubble and was my personal education that there was a lot going on in the world. And I didn't know nearly enough about it as I felt I should. I felt a responsibility to have a better understanding of, the world around me and people and what was going on. And so from that point, I became sort of addicted to the news and learning as much as I could, which led to me studying human rights and politics in college. And I would say also, from personal experiences with people in my life, I had a number of friends growing up who did not have the privileges that I had growing up. And I saw, as a result of that, their life trajectory looked very different than mine. And so it was a real formative lesson that your means, your resources can really mean life or death. And wanting to leverage all the resources that I had and the opportunities I had to help as many people as I could and really try to level the playing field and make it such that growing up in poverty or being low income or being homeless, helping folks, that's not a static condition. We can pull folks out of that with the right systems, with the right kind of advocacy. And so I felt, on a personal level, having seen that in my own life, a real passion for doing that work. And of course, I will also have to mention the fact that both of my parents are attorneys. And so growing up, I was very familiar with the tools that are in a lawyer's toolbox. And when I graduated from college and making that decision, and it was really for me, social work school, even public health school, or going to law school, like what tools did I want to have to make the change that I wanted to see in the world? I ultimately wanted the tools that are in a lawyer's toolbox. I wanted to be able to help on an individual level, help the clients, better their situation, empower them, but also have the ability to make bigger systemic changes. And I'm so grateful for the work that I get to do at Swords because it allows me to do all of that. And the team that I work with do all of that. We help hundreds of veterans every year in their VA benefits claims and their discharge upgrade applications, but we're also working on impact litigation work. We're also working to change the regulations at the VA. So not only just addressing the on the ground work that needs to get done in order to get, San Francisco veterans off the street, but changing the bigger systems so that, you gotta approach it, from all angles and in order to really see serious change. And that's the job that I have. I get paid to do it. I can't believe it. I feel like the luckiest person in the world. I'm really shocked. It's so easy to be motivated by working with this population of clients and on this work. So anyway, that was sort of my path to getting here. And I guess I would say in terms of veterans specifically, pure luck. I do have veterans in my family. I have a couple of uncles who served, and both my grandparents, grandfathers served. But really, I came to this work, because I wanted to do public interest work. I wanted to do anti-poverty work, and Swords was doing that work, and they were helping folks who do not get the kind of attention that they deserve. And they had a job opening and I got hired, and here I am today. Yeah.
No, that's awesome. And it's interesting that, 9/11 is really what motivated you to this career, because especially from the veteran side, 9/11 is what drove so many people to join the military, to think
Yes.
about the military, even if they had military in their family. 9/11 was the turning point of, hey, I need to do this now. So that's really cool that connected you. And I want to get to a lot of what you and your team are doing at Swords here in a minute, but I still want to back up a little bit
Sure.
to as we move forward, because I thought it was really interesting that one of your first jobs was at the DNA, and I'm forgetting the name
DNA
now.
People's Legal Services. Yeah.
Exactly, which, you know, at first blush, people might think it's got something to do with the traditional DNA in your body and everything like that. But as I read up on it, it was really interesting that it is really focused on tribal rights and legal services for them. And because there is, and maybe you knew this, and this is what I want to get into, maybe you knew this and worked on it at the time, but there is such a need for support for Native Americans who are in the military, who are veterans, to get them the support they need. Was that part of your work, or what did you do there? And just curious about everything that you did while you were there and how it may or may not have played a role in the future of your career.
Yeah, it was an incredible first job out of law school. Essentially, my role was, well, let me back up and say I worked on the Navajo Nation, which is essentially, it's the largest Indian reservation in the country. It's got a land mass the size of West Virginia. It basically takes up the top northeast corner of the state of Arizona and some parts of New Mexico, and a tiny little bit of Utah. And there's basically, it's got a very large judicial system. There's 12 judicial districts. There's a Supreme Court. I was practicing Navajo law. I had to take the Navajo bar exam. The courthouse was a double wide trailer in a, one stoplight town of Kayenta, Arizona. I should say, no, two stoplight town of Kayenta, Arizona. And I was the staff attorney along with my coworker, Micah, at the local domestic violence shelter. And so we were representing Navajos, primarily women, who in protection order matters, divorce cases, child support, child custody in Navajo court. And so it was an education in a lot of things, living in the middle of nowhere, having to drive 2.5, 3 hours to buy a bunch of groceries and lug them home because that was where the nearest, major town was in Flagstaff. All the sort of struggles of delivering legal services in a rural population where there's not consistent mail service. Not everybody has cell phones. Not everybody has cell phone service. Not everybody has an address. It's all directions, like turn left at this, mile marker, etc. And it was also an education in working with trauma survivors and developing rapport and trust with people who were, in this case, very recent victims of violence by people, who they love and their family, and learning about trauma and how to work with people who've experienced trauma, of course, has been, elemental in my work with veterans, as so many have also experienced trauma, and our work at Swords focuses on folks who experience mental health. So yeah, it was a very interesting first job. I was in court all the time. It was a great experience as a young lawyer. And after about 1.5 years of doing that, it was really like it had been very difficult work. And as you can imagine, being isolated in the middle of nowhere and having every day dealing with trauma. And so I had already passed the California bar before I took that role in Arizona. So I was just looking for a position back in the Bay Area where I had community, and Swords was hiring. And so I went from working at DNA to Swords.
That's excellent. And I kind of skipped over that part of your bio because I thought you went to Swords and then you did some other things, and then now you're back at Swords again.
Yes.
So that's great. Obviously shows that it's an organization that you really enjoy and appreciate, and they do great work, which we know. And so again, we'll get to a lot more on that. But I did want to bring up the work that you did there because it is such a part, and especially for those that weren't tracking, the Native American History Memorial and Museum in Washington, D.C. On Veterans Day, they opened a new Native American Veterans I guess, memorial there, which just opened, as I said, on Veterans Day. And I think there's some legislation that Senator Tester and his colleagues on the Senate VA committee just recently introduced to improve medical care via the VA for those in the Indian tribal services and the medical community there and everything. And so it really is a complex issue that brings together so much of things that also overlap into the veteran community and things like that. So thank you for that. It was good background. It's good to know everything that's going on there. So let's then move on to swords and your work there and everything that you've done in between, because I think there's a lot to discuss here and frankly, a lot to teach people about. I continue to learn a lot about this. I know you testified recently, I think it was in July, you testified before the House VA committee. I learned a lot. I was taking a lot of notes during that time. I think this is going to be a very broad and open kind of question / statement, because I think most in the military and certainly in the veteran community, we're familiar with honorable discharges, and you might know a dishonorable discharge, and then like everything in between is kind of like, I don't know, there's something in there, something has a lot of, I think, incorrect beliefs that if you got something other than an honorable discharge, you probably deserved it. And there's probably a good reasoning behind it. And I think, well, I know that you know this, and I've certainly been learning this in the last 5 years that I've been with IAVA. This is here more and more, especially within the post 9/11 community, but I think probably extending far beyond and before that, but maybe it's getting the attention it finally deserves because of the numbers from the post 9/11 community. But the reality is, there really is a huge disparity in the way these decisions are handed down and who gets them, who doesn't, what it means and things like that. So I guess what I want to start things off by saying is, can you just kind of give us the basic primer for people who aren't necessarily tracking on all this issue? What is the issue around bad paper discharge and veterans, and what do we need to do about it?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is my absolute favorite thing to talk about. So buckle in, we're going to have a fun conversation. So yes, let me start with the basics of discharge statuses in the military. There are 6 different discharges that you can leave the service with. And you're right, a lot of people know honorable and dishonorable, but there's some in between. And in our work at Swords, we basically, why this matters so much is what discharge status you got when you separated from the service is going to have a huge impact on your eligibility for VA benefits. It's also going to have an impact on your employment opportunities when you get out, because if you have to show a DD 214 separation document that shows you got a less than honorable discharge to a potential employer, that's going to be a barrier, of course. Kind of housing benefits from the VA that you're going to be able to get, the healthcare from the VA. So there's lasting impacts for vets who get less than honorable discharges. So let me break down what those 6 different are and who gets them and why. So there's honorable, and then there's right under there, general under honorable conditions. So honorable, we can imagine, very little, if 0 misconduct in your record, you get an honorable discharge. Typically, that's also, you've completed your entire enlistment, or you finished your commission, you've done all you've done and you did it well, you get an honorable. General under honorable conditions discharge, the one right under it, is for folks who have some minor misconduct in service that is such that the person issuing their discharge status didn't think that their service warranted a fully honorable discharge, but not so severe that they got court-martialed or anything like that, but just some minor misconduct. That's what we call a general discharge. And then under that is an other than honorable discharge, or what we're often calling OTH discharges. And that's somebody with maybe a little bit more than minor misconduct in their record. But again, to be clear, this is not a court-martial conviction. This is not a criminal conviction by any means. It's still an administrative separation that they get from command, and it's an other than honorable discharge. And then there's also uncharacterized, which we don't see too often, but that's given to folks who are basically separated during their first 180 days in service, during boot camp. And there are various reasons for that, but basically it's just not a good fit. maybe there is some misconduct, or there's just, some pre-existing condition, knee injury from high school or whatever that's now flared up, and it's not a good fit. So they basically separate the service member, but they don't have enough to say it was honorable or less than honorable, so they call it uncharacterized. All right, and then the last two are the punitive discharges. And by that I mean discharges that you necessarily got as a result of being convicted via court-martial. And so there's the bad conduct discharge, and then the more severe is the dishonorable discharge. Less than 1% of all service members get a dishonorable discharge. You've rarely ever seen it. I think I've seen one in my 6-7 years of advocating for veterans. It's not common at all. And the one other thing I'll say is there's 3 different types of court-martials within the service. There's summary court-martials, which don't have the authority to separate somebody, so they're not too relevant for our purposes of this conversation. And then there's special court-martials, which are sort of the equivalent of a misdemeanor level court. And then there's general court-martials, which are the more equivalent to a more felony level court in the civilian world. Okay, so those are the different discharge statuses, the different court-martials. A special court-martial, that misdemeanor level court, they can give somebody a bad conduct discharge. But in order to get a fully dishonorable discharge, you have to have been convicted by general court-martial, that more severe criminal court. Okay, so what happens is if you have an honorable or a general under honorable discharge, and you go to the VA and you try to get disability compensation or health care, or perhaps a housing voucher, you will be eligible so long as you meet the other criteria, for that entitlement. Your discharge status is not going to get in the way of your getting services at the VA. The one exception is GI Bill. You need a fully honorable for GI Bill education benefits, but short of that, if you want healthcare, disability compensation, pension, etc., if you have an honorable or a general, you're good to go. And then everything under that, the VA does what's called a character of discharge determination process. And so if you have a bad conduct or an OTH discharge, and you go to get compensation from the VA or healthcare from the VA, what the VA is supposed to do is at that point assess whether or not to let you in the door. And how they make that determination is based on both some statutory bars that Congress put out in 1944. And then in addition, there's also regulations that the VA has promulgated that determine whether or not someone should get in the door. And so a couple of issues happen at this point. One is there's a significant problem at the VA of veterans who have less than honorable discharges trying to access services and benefits and care at the VA, who are simply turned away. There is a lack of education and understanding on the behalf of VA staff, in particular, the Veterans Health Administration, about what to do when a vet comes through the door with an OTH discharge. And they don't even initiate this character of discharge determination process. So the door is shut on those veterans and they think, oh, I'm not eligible for anything. And that's the end of the story. And in fact, there's quotes from Bob McDonald and Dr. Shulkin on the record testifying, saying, oh, well, if they have, if a vet comes and has bad paper, our hands are tied, we can't help them. So the misinformation about this has, is widespread. So the other issue that happens is, let's say the veteran files for service-connected compensation or the like and has a bad conduct or other than honorable discharge, and the VA actually processes their application and assesses their eligibility. The way that they are applying these statutes and regulations is very problematic. And it leads to incredibly inconsistent and unjust results. And feel free to interrupt me, I could talk about this forever, but essentially what happens is you have the 1944 Congress passing the GI Bill and promulgating these statutory regulations. And a former Swords attorney, Brad Adams, and a comrade of his, Dana Montalto, at Harvard Law School, at about 5 years ago, did a deep dive into the congressional history at that point when that law was getting passed, to get a better understanding of what did Congress intend when they passed those statutory bars. And what they found in that congressional history is significant evidence that Congress intended only those with a dishonorable discharge, or those who could have gotten a dishonorable discharge, be barred from veterans benefits. And so we're talking about, again, felony level criminal conviction type misconduct, or they were a deserter and they never came back to actually get court-martialed. So they would have gotten a dishonorable discharge, but they didn't have the opportunity. So those were the folks that Congress wanted the VA to shut the door on. And what happened was the VA then went and promulgated their own rules and their own regulations. And 87% of character of discharge determinations are denied under regulatory grounds, not statutory grounds. So the vast majority of veterans who are getting denied at this entry eligibility point are denied on regulatory grounds. And it is for misconduct, I can tell you, that is so minor that it would, I mean, sometimes it's like you could still get an honorable discharge for some of this stuff, but, you know, command discretion or the like, they didn't. But it doesn't nearly rise to the level of a felony level criminal act. I'll give you an example. We had a client this summer who got denied eligibility for testing positive for drugs one time after 18 months of service. Again, they would never even bother to court-martial that, and yet the VA is denying that person eligibility. You're AWOL for a couple of days and you can be barred for life from VA benefits. Again, not rising to the level of a dishonorable discharge. And so what we're seeing is the VA's rules have really run amok of Congress's intent. And as a result, we're seeing folks who are getting barred from benefits who never should have been barred from benefits. And of course, you know, a huge component of this, and any practitioner who is working with this veteran population will tell you this, is that these are not dirtbags. These are not, you know, men and women who screwed up and just like were bad actors and didn't care about military order or the rules, and they just decided to like do whatever the heck they wanted to do. It is the vast majority of the time folks who joined the service and were serving honorably, and then something traumatic happened. Either they went to Iraq or Afghanistan and they saw combat, or they survived sexual assault or rape, or some other personal hardship happened, something else traumatic happened to them. And before that point, they served honorably. And in fact, many served honorably in war, right? And then they come back, or they're in the aftermath of that, and they are struggling with their mental health. And it is very difficult to struggle with anxiety and hypervigilance and nightmares and all of the, you know, symptoms of PTSD or depression while you need to do your job in the service. Those are not compatible things. And so it results in misconduct, right? They go AWOL to escape their rapist. They test positive for marijuana because they're trying to self-medicate their anxiety. You know, and then, you know, there's all this command discretion that's involved in this. And so we are also seeing significantly higher rates of bad paper for veterans of color, for example. There was a great report by an organization called Protect Our Defenders from a few years ago, who did, you know, a ton of FOIA requests and research into this, and found that Black airmen were 71% more likely to face court-martial, and that 61% and for Black soldiers in the Army were 61% more likely to face court-martial or non-judicial punishment than their white airmen and white soldier comrades. And so you have, mental health playing a major factor in this. You have government reports showing that the military is separating folks with bad paper discharges after they've been diagnosed with PTSD on active duty. You have race playing a component. You also have great discrepancies in branch. The Marine Corps separates about 10% of their service members with other than honorable discharges. The Air Force less than half of 1%. Okay, and then you have the issue of ERA, which you'll see when the 1944 Congress was passing this. 1.7% of service members at that time during the World War II era were separated with a less than honorable discharge. And a lot of folks who were serving in Congress, were also veterans themselves, and they understand the difficulty of service and the hardship that can happen, that can result in misconduct. And they wanted to give veterans the benefit of the doubt. And that's why they, were more lenient about who gets in the door and who gets care and services at the VA. And now you fast forward to Iraq and Afghanistan vets, and you're seeing about 7% have discharge statuses that are preventing them from getting care and access to the VA. And so at the end of the day, what we have is a system where if you're in the Air Force, if you served in World War II or Vietnam, or if you're white, or if you weren't raped or you didn't see combat, then you get care at the VA. But if you're a recent era veteran and you're a veteran of color and you're a trauma survivor and you happen to serve in the Marines as opposed to the Navy, then you don't get anything from the VA. And it's like, this doesn't make any sense. At the end of the day, this is not how this should work. And so I hope you can understand my passion for this, because it's really just it's a perfect example of injustice. And I agree. I think a lot of people think that, oh, well, these are, losers, they're failures, they got kicked out, and at the end of the day, when you actually do this work and you look at the statistics, what you realize is the vast majority of these folks are combat vets and MST survivors, military sexual trauma survivors, and they're young men and women. And they got kicked out for really unjust reasons instead of getting the help and the healthcare and the treatment that they needed. And now, as a result, you have a veteran population that's twice as likely to experience homelessness, 50% more likely to be incarcerated, and twice as likely to die by suicide than those with honorable discharges. It's unconscionable. It really is. Yeah. Anyway, I feel like I've spent all this time talking. I could go on, and I apologize for monopolizing it. But if anything, I would love for people to walk away from this conversation with a very strong understanding of the injustice.
No, and that's exactly why we wanted to talk to you. So it's great. Trust me, you're doing exactly what we brought you here to do. And so I appreciate it. The one thing I think I forgot to say, and I do want to put this out, is for folks listening, if you have questions, please put them into the Facebook comment section. We'll try and get to them, because this is we actually already have questions. I'm now getting a text on that. Okay. So that's great. So I'll finish saying, that's why, I was trying to pay attention to you, but I also kind of wanted to be just taking notes the whole time you were talking, but I felt like that might kind of look like I was not paying attention, because I'm still learning so much on this issue. It is confusing, even for veterans, and it does tie in with so many of the other issues that IAVA and all these other veteran service organizations are trying to deal with. Like you said, military sexual trauma, homelessness, all of these things in so many cases are interlapping and overweaving. And so let me take a break. I'm going to throw it to Victor, who is monitoring things. Victor, do you want to give us some questions?
Yes, thank you so much, Jeremy. This question is for Mo. Megan McGuire asks, could you please discuss medical boards, specifically veterans who were diagnosed with PTSD after combat deployments and/or sexual assaults and denied benefits?
Yeah, sure. So what they're asking about is essentially when a veteran is diagnosed in service with a condition or has a physical disability that's preventing them from continuing in their military career, there's a process by which they go before a medical board to assess, their disability and the percentage of that disability to determine whether they need to be medically separated. There's also the option of being medically retired. And what happens is, and I'll be frank, I don't have a ton of experience navigating that process for service members, but what I will say is that we very often see veterans who are in the middle of that process, who, for example, have some misconduct, right? They show up late to work, perhaps because of the sleep disturbance, because of their PTSD, or they test positive, for drug use in the middle of that process. And that completely interrupts the process, and then they get kicked out with an other than honorable discharge or a less than honorable discharge. And so, again, what you have is folks who have service-connected, service-related disabilities, mental health disabilities, who perhaps are having manifestations or symptoms of that condition, or who are coping with that, and are getting kicked out, and then, of course, being denied medical care from the VA, disability compensation. Perhaps their PTSD is so severe that they can't work when they get out, and now they have no financial safety net from the VA. As a result. And the other thing I will say is that there's been a lot of reporting on the DoD's failure to properly med board folks when it's been identified that they have a mental health condition or a disability, because it's a very lengthy process, and my understanding is a very resource intensive process. And so it's much easier for the DoD, especially in times of conflict, of war, to instead find some reason to kick this person out and just get them off the rolls and get them out of there, so that they can replace that person with a deployable, healthy service member. And so we see that pattern a lot. Dave Phillips wrote a book, Lethal Warriors, a few years ago that describes this practice very well. And so, again, very unjust circumstances that lead the individual veteran without a lot of help at the end of the day.
Thank you so much. Our next question is from Shannon Adams, and it is for both of you. How best can those on the ground, supporters, for example, communicate how Swords to Plowshares and IAVA can assist veterans that may have fallen into a discharge that would qualify for a reevaluation?
That's a great question. And I'll just jump in for a second, because that's exactly what I actually then wanted to talk about next, is you've done a great job of laying out a lot of what the problem is. And so I'd love to hear, and I'll let you start off with answering that question, because I know that is so much of what your work is to now fix the problem. And that's what you were testifying before Congress, like I said, back in the House Veteran Affairs Committee. So I'll turn it over to you, please.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, as I mentioned in the beginning, at Swords, we do both on the ground work and this higher level policy work. And so I'll start with the higher level policy work. So what we've done is 5 years ago, Swords to Plowshares, along with the National Veterans Legal Services Program, which is NVLSP based in DC, helmed by Bart Stitchman, who's a huge advocate for veterans and has done a lot of work on this, on the bad issue of bad paper and VA access for veterans generally. So we partnered with NVLSP, represented by the Harvard Legal Services Program. Dana Montalto, the attorney who I mentioned earlier, is on that legal team, along with some pro bono, some volunteer attorneys from the law firm Latham and Watkins. We put together a petition to the VA in 2015, asking that they change their rules. We put forth all of that information that I discussed about the congressional intent and the fact that so many of these vets, are suffering from mental health issues, are getting turned away. And the VA accepted that petition. And the day after the congressional hearing, actually, about this issue of bad paper veterans before the House Veterans Affairs Committee, the VA finally put forth proposed regulation, proposing to change the rules around how they do these character of discharge determinations. So then following that, there was a period of public comment. Swords to Plowshares and NVLSP put together an omnibus public comment that's available on Swords' website, responding to the proposed language. And right now we're waiting for the VA to finalize that rule and hoping that they will integrate the feedback that we put forth and many other veterans organizations put forth. Because what they did propose really does not address what we put forth in our petition. It continues to deny other than honorable veterans VA benefits, which is contrary to congressional intent. Congress knew in 1944 that OTH vets existed, and there's language in the congressional record that says, nope, we want them in the door, and the VA is not doing that, and they continue to not do this in their proposal. And so the ball is in their court now, and obviously we're having an administration change, and it's a little unclear how that's going to impact that. But we're waiting for new rules right now from the VA. So we do a lot of work like that. We also involve in more impact litigation work, trying to change the law through the courts. And then the other sort of way that veterans are served by Swords specifically is that we have a small but mighty team of legal advocates in our San Francisco office, all of course working remotely right now. We serve about 300 veterans every year. 44% of our cases are character of discharge determination cases, and we serve San Francisco veterans. And so it's all homeless folks, low-income folks who come to our service centers, either in Oakland or San Francisco, and we provide them, representation before the VA in this process. We try to get them that monetary benefits from the VA and the healthcare access to at the VA, and also help them navigate the discharge upgrade process. I belong to a community, though, of attorneys who do this work. And so we are limited to serving those in San Francisco, but NVLSP has a more national scope. There are a network of law schools that have veterans law clinics now all over the country that provide direct representation for free to veterans trying to navigate this process and help them get benefits. Connecticut Veterans Legal Center in Connecticut also does this work. So there's a lot of other organizations and organizations like NVLSP, and there's a pro bono consortium out of DC affiliated with NVLSP that does national level work. So we help the pool of vets in San Francisco, but there are a ton of other attorneys who are dedicated and amazing who do this work nationally.
Yeah, no, it's exactly right. And I'll sort of start on that level and go up larger scale from there. So IAVA has our Quick Reaction Force, formerly Rapid Response Referral Program, and we do just that. We help connect veterans and veterans families in need with organizations who can help them. So as you said, Swords to Plowshares focuses on the Bay Area, but veterans coming to us for help finding legal services is one of the top reasons why veterans come to us, and because it is such a challenging thing. It's expensive often, it's complex. Like you said, the VA often gives contradictory information that doesn't go along with their own regulations, doesn't go along with what the law intended. So what we try and do, you can go to, and Victor can post things on all this in the comments as well, but you can reach out to our QRF program directly. You can call directly, you can go online and ask them to reach out to you, and they can help connect you based on your geography with an organization that can best help. And that's sort of like working on the immediate side. On the other side, is trying to support organizations that are promoting legislative changes that can really fix this issue. And I wanted to touch a little bit on the fact that we've got an administration change, and any thoughts, and we'll get to this, but any thoughts you might have if you want to go in that direction about the whoever might be nominated next to be VA Secretary. IAVA certainly has its opinions. Happy to talk about that. But then also some of the things, and you may or may not want to weigh in on this, we support legislation that gets at taking military sexual assault, military sexual trauma cases out of the hands of the chain of command. You talked about how it is often the commanders within the military that, they admittedly are carrying a lot of burdens on their back, and frankly, it is easier for them usually to get a disciplinary case off their cases so that they can bring in a healthy soldier, sailor, airman, whatever it is, so that they can kind of focus on that. And so often you do get military members that are kind of shortchanged by the system, and we see that certainly without a doubt all too often when it comes to allegations of rape and sexual assault and things like that. And so we support, IAVA supports legislation to take those cases out of the hands of the chain of command and putting them into more of a JAG position, someone that can really focus on and not have command influence on them affect the case, because we definitely see, and there's far too many reports of men and women who are dealing with a system that doesn't help them. And as Mo said, that often leads to then actions that can result in that victim getting an other than honorable discharge, which means not getting the services to help for the very thing that led to that case. And so it is just an incredible spiral. So great question, Shannon. Thank you for that. I'll throw it out again, that please keep your questions coming. We'll come back to that.
I also wanted to just quickly plug our Swords' self-help guides. So on our website, we have essentially a library of self-help guides for veterans who are trying to navigate the character of discharge process, the Department of Defense discharge upgrade process, those who are kicked out under Don't Ask, Don't Tell, who want a records correction for their DD-214, trans veterans who want to have their name changed on their DD-214, going to compensation and pension exams, et cetera, et cetera. There's so many guides on there. And we do that because we know, we're limited to this little geographical area, but we want to be able to, share our knowledge as far and wide as possible. So if you're a vet or somebody who works with vets, I encourage you to go on our website and look at the self-help guides, because there could be some info there to help them navigate this process on their own or with your guidance.
No, that's great. And you just reminded me of other things as well, which is I know New York State is working to upgrade New York State veterans who were discharged under Don't Ask, Don't Tell. And so, yeah, there really is a lot, such a huge issue right there that we're talking about that gets back to the fact of, having an other than honorable discharge does not mean you acted in an inappropriate way. It just means the system very possibly was just aligned against you. And so that's a great example of one of those areas where we need to make some changes. And you had mentioned this, and I printed out some things, and I think you posted this on your LinkedIn page, but it looked like there was just recently a settlement by the Army about looking at thousands of recent, I've got it in front of me, I'm trying to flip through it, but maybe if you know what I'm talking about, you want to touch on that a little bit.
Yeah, this was some great news yesterday out of Yale Law School. Has one of the best veterans legal clinics in the country, run by Professor Mike Wishney and an attorney Renee Burbank, and Dana Montalto actually is working with them, I believe, this year as well, on leave from Harvard. And they had a huge win for Army veterans who post 9/11 Army veterans, essentially. So let me back up and say in 2014, there were some significant changes in the discharge upgrade rules. And essentially what they said was, if the veteran who's applying for a discharge upgrade before the board indicates in their application that mental health, or PTSD in particular, is a component to the misconduct, right? There's a causal link between the mental health they were dealing with and the misconduct, that those applicants will be given liberal consideration. And the lawsuit that Yale filed, I think with the firm Jenner and Block, they basically sued, saying that the Army's Discharge Review Board was not following this guidance of giving liberal consideration when mental health is at play. And they got a huge settlement. Yesterday, they announced that the Army had agreed that they were going to go back and review all of those folks who did not get full relief in their discharge upgrade application. I believe from April 2011 to today, they were going to automatically do a re-review of those. And then anybody from 9/11 up till April 2011, they were going to get a notification in the mail that they can reapply and have their application looked at again. discharge upgrades are a huge part of the work that we do. We have an extensive network of pro bono attorneys that help with our discharge upgrade work. It's incredibly difficult to get one. The chances of success are very low. Even when we have clients who, have, documented military sexual trauma, are already service connected by the VA for it. And we put all this evidence forth that was why they, were using spice at the time or whatever it is that got them kicked out. Those applications are still getting denied, even though there's guidance that says, you've got to consider this and you've got to give them leniency. Anyway, it's a very frustrating part of our work because it seems like the DoD does not follow the rules. So anytime, they can be compelled to do so, I'm a huge fan of that.
No, that's awesome. And I was just, like I said, I've got it in front of me, so I'm looking at it. And what I think what's interesting is that this was a case against the Army. This is not a case against the Department of Defense. And
yes.
so I think the article references that there's a separate case against the Navy to try and do the same thing. So this
Yes.
literally has to be refought and refought kind of every branch along the way, which seems ridiculous. I'm assuming there's a legal reason why they had to go after the Army and the Navy independently and things like that. But hopefully this Army or this win against the Army will bode well for the fight against the Navy, and hopefully, I'm assuming, maybe incorrectly, that that'll also include the Marine Corps, since the Navy is part of the Secretary of the Navy, the Department of the Navy,
Yes,
but then the Air Force probably needs their own.
Yes, it would. The Marine Corps and the Navy shared discharge review boards, and all the others have their own, but yes. Yeah, and it's ultimately it's because each branch has their own rules about separating folks, and they have their own separate boards about who get to decide what's equitable and what isn't, what is justice, what isn't. And so, yeah, you got to go piecemeal one at a time. But I agree. The fact that this is how this suit came down with the Army, hopefully the other branches will follow suit and do a similar review because the vets seriously deserve it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And now a question from me, just to clarify, when you're talking about when a veteran is looking to get VA services and they have to go through the character of discharge upgrade, that determination has nothing to do with their actual discharge from the military. So that just because they get a positive review in that character discharge upgrade, that doesn't change the discharge that they got from the military. Is that correct?
Yeah, thank you for asking. That's an excellent question. Yeah, so they're completely different processes that have different outcomes. So the process that I've been talking about is that VA character of discharge process. The outcome of that is merely that you still have the less than honorable discharge, but the VA is going to find you eligible for all the VA benefits, again, except for GI Bill. The Department of Defense's process, which is called a discharge upgrade, if successful in that, the outcome is the veteran's discharge status is literally changed in their military record. So if they got an other than honorable discharge, they'll be issued a new DD-214 separation document that says honorable, or something better than what they got. So it really depends on the veteran's goals, what the client wants. If all they care about is getting a housing voucher from the VA, so they're off the streets and they need health care because they have disabilities, then maybe the VA system is all that they need to go through. But if they're a younger vet and they're going to be out on the workforce for the next 40 years, having an other than honorable discharge and drug abuse as the narrative reason for separation is really going to be a barrier again and again and again. Getting that cleaned up is going to be essential to them. So yes, we navigate both processes. You can do both at once. It really just comes down to what is the client's goal.
Excellent. I touched on it a little bit. Do you have any thoughts? Is there, as we move into the new administration, one of the big things, there's kind of three criteria that IVA always focuses on for a VA secretary. Ideally a veteran, preferably has a medical background, not necessarily a medical doctor, but some sort of understanding, since they are going to be running the largest healthcare system. And then also that they have experience running a massive bureaucracy. The VA is huge, second largest department, 300,000 plus employees. 20+ billion, I think, in its budget.
Yeah.
And so if you're going in there and you don't have experience running a large organization, I feel like you're going to fail. So would love to hear it if you have thoughts, personal thoughts or swords to plowshares thoughts, or however you want to characterize it on what you would like to see.
Well, yes, I don't have any swords to plowshares thoughts. So asterisks, no, not those. But yeah, it's funny because that's an excellent question. And because we do a lot of this like on the ground work, I don't spend a lot of time thinking about like the appointments at the VA like this. But one of the reasons we fight so hard for VA eligibility for vets is because the VA does an excellent job. They provide outstanding mental health treatment. They understand veterans, the veterans' issues, veteran patients. They understand the needs of this community. And they are very generous with their monetary benefits when, they finally find you entitled to them. So it's a huge, wonderful system. And that is why we fight so hard to get folks in the door. And so, there's been such an effort in the last few years, and certainly under Trump, to privatize the VA, to take a lot of the money from the VA's budget and put it into private health facilities' hands. And so I would hope that we can pivot from that direction and preserve the VA and protect it. And of course, President-elect Biden has personal, close to home experience with bad paper veterans with his son, and understands that, addiction is a disease and it can lead to misconduct that can get somebody kicked out of the, that again, these are not dirtbags, right? These are people, these are vets who served, they served honorably, perhaps for many years, and they deserve care and benefits. In my, ideal world, there's a national coordinator at VA dedicated to, coordinating services for vets with less than honorable discharges, so that nobody walks into a VA facility with an OTH and gets turned, the door shut on them without going through, not following the law and going through the character of discharge process. So some dedication and attention, obviously, to that population. Always, women veterans, making it a more inclusive environment for female veterans to access health care at the VA. There was a huge report a few months ago in the New York Times about the sexual harassment that many face, employees as well are facing at VA. I'm a huge supporter of changing the VA's motto to get rid of that gendered language in that and have it be more inclusive. So I have to say, I completely agree. I'm in the middle right now of David Shulkin's book. I'm a little behind in reading it, but it's fascinating. I highly recommend it to folks. I'm actually listening to the audiobook, so I recommend it. But I mean, talk about a guy who loves systems. I mean, he really, he got in there and he took a look at things that weren't working, and he enabled communication so that people could really figure out how to improve customer service, how to improve, outputs and outcomes for health outcomes for veterans. And so, yeah, I agree. I think somebody with that kind of background and experience is going to be successful in that role.
Excellent. Well, you said several things there that I wanted to agree with 100%. I mean, everything you said I agree with, but a few things to highlight. Was a shameless plug, actually. Dr. Shulkin is one on IVA's board of directors, but I also—
Oh, really? Oh, I didn't know.
Yeah, I knew you didn't. That's why I thought I'd just throw it out there.
Well, I'm a big fan.
I also did a book interview with him when the book came out. So if you go to C-SPAN somewhere from several months ago, you can find he and I talking for an hour about his book. Yeah, because I agree, and there's some really good things. And I love your idea about having a dedicated person or office, whatever it might be, at the VA that directly focuses on that, because I think that would be incredibly helpful to make sure those veterans get the help and care that they need and deserve. So great idea. I think we've got another question, so let me throw it over to Victor if you've got a few more minutes to stick with us.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you, Jeremy. This question is for Mo. Derek Blumke asks, have you looked at the role of antidepressants in playing a causal role for conduct and mental health related discharges?
The role of antidepressants. I'm not sure I understand the question, but I'm not sure I understand the question, but here are some thoughts anyway. I've seen clients who are taking prescription medication that is not prescribed to them, that perhaps is prescribed to another service member, but they are fearful of going and getting mental health treatment while they're still on active duty because they're, trying to move into a job or trying to get a security clearance or trying to stay in their job, whatever it is. And so they're not going to go get the mental health care that they need. And they use another service member's, prescription, not with their permission. And it pops up in a drug test, for example. And because it's not prescribed to them, they'll get kicked out for that reason. There are also lots of side effects of antidepressant drugs that might make it difficult to do your work in the service. Sleeplessness and things like that could, interfere. So I'm not sure if that's what they were going after, but that's some information at least.
No, and I think you're probably right, and I think that probably is getting to the question. I think there's a lot of fear among service members that if they admit to whatever it might be from a knee injury that they don't want to disclose because it means they won't deploy again, to mental health concerns, things like that, they look for other avenues, potentially technically illegal ones, like you said, trying to use someone else's prescription. Maybe it's smoking marijuana to relieve some pain or some anxiety, things like that, to try and get around it, which can ultimately then lead to other problems and them getting another than honorable discharge, even though, again, it all traces back to honorable service and them simply trying to maintain that ability to continue to serve because that's what they want to do, and that can lead to some trouble. So yeah, it's a good question. Victor, do you have any other questions for us right now?
Not at this moment, thank you.
Okay, great. Well, then let me shift. I don't want to go on too long, but what does 2021 look like for you guys? Is there anything big changing? I imagine, as with everyone, the pandemic is changing your ability to provide services and things like that, but hopefully you're still adapting and overcoming and things like that.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's been a huge change for us in the delivery of our services at Swords. And I should say that, the legal unit at Swords, we are just one little sliver of the work that Swords does. We provide housing to hundreds of veterans in our 8 different housing projects every night in San Francisco. We do so much homeless outreach and activism and employment and training. We have case managers, we have mental health clinicians, the whole gamut. It's a wraparound services program. And so we've had a lot of parts of Swords, stay open and obviously trying to get folks housed. Very grateful to the VA's SSVF program for funding a lot of the emergency housing that we've been able to provide to vets to get them off the street and safe during the pandemic. In the legal services unit, we're working all remotely and working with clients over the phone. We're still intaking new clients, but it's all over the phone. And, because we're working with such a low income and vulnerable population, it's not, we don't have the ability to Zoom with them, unfortunately. And I have to say, after months and months of this, I really personally miss clients. I didn't realize how much I really got in terms of energy from going and sitting across from vets and working with them as opposed to having phone calls with them. And of course, trying to establish rapport and trust with a brand new client who's never even met me, who can't see my facial expressions. And, it's very difficult. But we stay open. We're still seeing, comparable amount of vets that we were seeing before. I worry, though, that the more vulnerable folks we aren't accessing because they just don't have the ability to connect with us right now. So there's been a lot of change, but we're still, still coming to work, still working very hard. And I would say in terms of, next year, we're anticipating at some point these finalized character discharge regs that the VA is going to put forth. I hope that perhaps under a Biden administration, they're going to scrap the proposed language that they came up with that is frankly terrible and maybe sit down with some stakeholders and service providers who are doing this work, and and really listen to us about what the VA needs to do and how they need to do right by these bad paper veterans. The other thing that I'm super interested in is, a couple of years ago, there was this whole revamp of the appeal system in VA claims. And what we're seeing on the ground is a lot more denials under the higher level review path than we used to see under the old system's decision review officer path. And a lot of issues with having conferences and with adjudicators where they don't know anything about the claim. They don't even know what the issues are on appeal, and you're trying to have a substantive conversation about why your client's entitled to, monetary benefits that, they depend on in order to meet their basic needs. And you're talking to someone at the VA who's like, oh, I don't have the file open. Well, just tell me what you think. And, and just very frustrating interactions that, are arguably unlawful. So we're focusing on that, seeing if there's anything we can do about maybe improving that system as well for folks.
That's awesome. And I'm glad you mentioned it, because that was supposed to be one of my early questions, was to ask you about everything that Swords to Plowshares does. I know that the legal representation is just one part of a lot of great work that you guys do. So maybe now the other question I was going to ask, and I'll ask Victor to make sure it goes into the comments and things like that, is how can people reach Swords to Plowshares? I know you support veterans in the Bay Area, maybe San Francisco specifically, but for those veterans that are looking for support in any of those areas, what's the best way for them to get in touch with you?
Oh, that's a great question. Well, they can call our main number, which is 415-212-7897. I think it's been so long since I've called it, but look on our website. But call the main line. We have a centralized intake system, so any veteran who calls us is going to get screened for the plethora of services that we provide at Swords. Our website has a ton of information. If you are we help folks in San Francisco, and we also have an office in Oakland as well. But yeah, that would be the best way to get in touch with us.
Excellent. And you mentioned that you've got those resources. I think that it doesn't matter where you're a veteran, they can be helpful. And so hopefully Victor can post that website. If you're a veteran that's not in that area that needs legal help, feel free. Victor can post the Quick Reaction Force, IAVA's information, and they can always get you in touch with Swords to Plowshares if you can't find that, or to another organization that can help you wherever you're located. So we're now over an hour. This has been an incredibly fast hour. Thank you so much for your time. It's a real honor to be able to get to talk to you and to honor you as our 2020 Civilian Leadership Honoree. I think it's very obvious why. You're doing incredible work, you and your colleagues. So thank you for being here with us. Thank you for everything that you're doing. And then I'll leave it to you if there's anything that we didn't touch on that you want to talk about, or any areas that you think folks need to know about.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jeremy. This has been such a thrill. It really has. And I just really appreciate the opportunity. Anytime I can talk about vets who have less than honorable discharges, because, it's just, there's so much misinformation and misconception out there about these very deserving folks. So if I had to end on any note, I just would say that I certainly do not do this work alone. We have an amazing legal team at Swords to Plowshares. I am grateful every day for my colleagues. It is an honor to lead the team there. This work is the honor of my life. I love it, and I really appreciate this award, and again, this opportunity to talk to you about these very important issues.
Awesome. Thank you. And they are important. And I'm continuing to learn. You're an incredible spokesperson for this subject because you have such a passion for it. I think it carries over to people listening to help them, I think, understand why it's important. So thank you. I look forward to, maybe we'll be testifying on the same panel here sometimes once we're back into non-quarantine times, or it'll be via Zoom. They're doing it all sorts of ways. So thank you again. Thank you for being here. Thank you for everyone who listened, who wrote in with questions. We really appreciate it. And stay tuned for hopefully more from both of us. Thank you again, Mo.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Bye-bye all.